Solomon said that there's nothing new under the sun, so I'm going to speak on a topic I've spoken before, kind of make sure that Solomon was right. But I'm doing so because of its seemingly increasing relevance in our world, in our modern world. We seem to live in a time in which everybody is quick to take offense at everybody else. We just seem to be so ready to be offended. We've even developed new terminology, at least it's new to me. I sometimes am several years behind the times. I used to rely on my daughter to fill me in, but nowadays it's kind of like I'll find out about something and it's, oh yeah, this has been around years, but it's new to me. But we have this terminology to signal offense. We will talk about things such as trigger warnings. You'll hear that expression, because what I'm about to say or what you're about to hear might offend someone, so I have to give a trigger warning. We refer to some people as snowflakes, because they're going to be offended very easily. We talk about cultural appropriation and how that offends people. And there are many, many others. And we're quick to label people with pejorative names if their opinions offend us. And so we feel free to retaliate with insults, with demeaning language addressed toward those whose words or actions we find offensive. And it cuts across ideological, political, religious opinions and views. And it's really something. Let's go to Luke 6. Mr. Haver read from Luke 6 last week, and as he was doing that, I thought so much of what he was reading was relevant to this particular topic that I want to speak on. So let's go to Luke 6 and start in verse 7. Luke 6 and verse 7. And here we read about the scribes and Pharisees and Jesus and his disciples. There's an encounter, and this is the Sabbath, and of course the priests and the scribes and the Pharisees, as it says in verse 7, were on the watch to see whether Jesus would heal a sick man whose right arm was withered, if he would heal him on the Sabbath so that they could find a charge to bring against him. So they approached Jesus seeking to be offended. They were looking for something that would offend them. And then in verse 11, of course, he heals them and challenges them. And in verse 11, we read that they totally failed to understand and began to discuss with one another what they could do to Jesus. So Jesus was doing good, he was healing, he was teaching, but these individuals were offended by him. And as a result of being offended, they decided we have to take some action. We have to do something about this man. How about us? Do we sometimes do that too? Do we look for something that maybe someone who holds a different religious opinion or different political opinion, do we look for something that they might say or do so that we can jump all over him and condemn him? Of course, we'd be doing it in righteousness. I understand that. But do we do that? Do we look to be offended? Well, let's continue here in Luke 6 and look at the response that Jesus demands of us. So starting in Luke 6 and verse 27, so a little further down in the chapter. To you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Well, right there, isn't an enemy someone whose point of view we would disagree with, that we would reject? I would imagine so. Otherwise, he wouldn't be an enemy, or she wouldn't be an enemy. So the first thing Jesus says is, love your enemies. So if we love our enemies, are we going to be easily offended by what they say or do? Do good to those who hate you. Again, same question. Would we then seek to jump all over them because of something they said or did? Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who treat you spitefully. If anyone hits you on the cheek, and this could be a metaphorical blow, offense, offer the other also. If anyone takes your coat, let him have your shirt as well. Give to everyone who asks you. If anyone takes what is yours, do not demand it back. So it seems to be here that Jesus is saying, don't get offended. Certainly don't be easily offended. In fact, respond in a positive way to someone who might seek to offend you. Because after all, an enemy, you may love your enemy, but the enemy may not love you. And so the enemy may be seeking your harm, may be seeking to offend you. But in return, you don't retaliate and pay him back in the same coin. You don't seek to take offense. Let's drop down to let's continue. Verse 31, treat others as you would like them to treat you. Treat others as you would like them to treat you. And I will be talking about that some more later. If you love only those who love you, how are you different from anybody else? You're not a follower of Christ. Now let's drop down to verse 35. You must love your enemies. It's not an option. You must love your enemies and do good, lend without expecting any return. So even if you forgive those who offend you, you can't expect that they will do the same to you. They should. You would like them to, but you can't expect that. You can't demand that. And you will have a rich reward, and you will be sons of the Most High, because he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. So if someone were deliberately seeking to offend you, to hurt you, he would be ungrateful and wicked perhaps. But your response is to be kind. Verse 36, be compassionate as your Father is compassionate. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned. So the same way you treat others is the way that you will be treated. Verse 41, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye? Because so very often we are offended by things which, frankly, are relatively minor. You've heard the expression, don't sweat the small stuff, right? Many of you have heard that. And the corollary to that is sometimes it's all small stuff. Well, maybe not all of it, but most of it is small stuff. But why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye with never a thought for the plank in your own? How can you say to your brother, brother, let me take the speck out of your eye when you're blind to the plank in your own? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's. And perhaps you'll have a little bit more credibility in your brother's sight when you do that. And then he concludes in verse 46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and never do what I tell you? And I think that applies to everyone who claims to be a follower of Christ, a believer. Why do you call him Lord, and yet we disregard these very clear instructions to love even our enemies and to be kind and to be compassionate? When it comes to taking offense, we often have a double standard. Have we, and I'm not asking for any show of hands, but have we ever said or done something that others could rightly be offended by? Just think about that for a second and be honest with yourself. If I'm honest, I certainly have. I've done that many times, probably more times than not only I can count, but maybe more times than I'm even aware of. Other people could probably make me aware of the times that I've offended them. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 7. Ecclesiastes 7, I think, has a verse that kind of summarizes that, a couple of verses. Ecclesiastes 7, and some good advice there too. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 21. Moreover, do not pay attention to everything folks say, or you may hear your servants speak ill of you. Verse 22, for you know very well how many times you yourself have spoken ill of others. In other words, don't be so quick to take offense by what somebody said or did. First, you need to think about the times that you've said and done things to offend others. So Ecclesiastes 7 here is saying we're all guilty. We're all guilty. And Paul, later in Romans 3:23 says, we have all sinned. So none of us is faultless in this area. So if we're all guilty, we should be as merciful to others as we would like others to be merciful to us. You know, there's an interesting psychological phenomenon that we see manifested when we study this topic. We we cut ourselves and our side, our people, our group, we cut ourselves a lot of slack, but not the other guy. See, we're kind and generous in our assessment of ourselves and our motives, but not so much in our assessment of others with whom we disagree. And so what ends up happening is that we assume our motivation. If I said something that was offensive, I'll assume my motivation was good. It's coming from a good place, good heart, maybe even noble. But we tend to assume the worst possible motivation in those we disagree with. And hence we get offended, because in our narrative, we are the good guys, and they, the other, are the bad guys. And since they're the bad guys, whatever they say or do is offensive to us, and clearly they meant to offend us. They were just nasty. That's not us. We're good. They are not so good. But is that a true representation of reality? I've talked about this also in the past. We see this phenomenon manifested in a common daily activity that most of us engage in. That is driving. Driving. If I speed or perform a driving maneuver that forces others to slow down, say, or brake suddenly, am I usually quick to condemn myself? I'm just speaking about myself here, not you. I'm probably more likely to justify what I did and try to explain it away. And I'd certainly probably try to do that if I was stopped by a traffic cop. Yet if somebody else does the same thing to me, what is my reaction? Is it even repeatable to a family audience? And I'd prepared this message, and I was driving here today on Highway 80. Highway 80, for those of you who are familiar, and I think that's just about everybody in this room, is, for a long stretch, 70 miles an hour, right? Speed limit. And there's not a whole lot of traffic most of the time. And so today, I'm coming here to church, and a person in front of me, nobody else in front of this vehicle, is driving at barely 55 miles an hour. Barely 55. Nothing holding the traffic up. So clearly I realize this person is deliberately trying to make me late for church. They obviously got up that morning and said, I'll plan this so that I'll leave. I'll know when he leaves. And they were deliberately trying to offend me by traveling at 55. Well, of course, I think we see that that's highly improbable. And as a result, of course, since I'm going to be speaking about not taking offense, I said, well, I'd better not be offended by this. And realized that there could be any number of reasons why this person is driving at that speed. It could be that the vehicle has some malfunction. Sometimes when you have problems with your tires, you maybe need to drive a little slower. Maybe the person is on the phone. Maybe the person is distracted. Maybe that person is driving after hearing some bad news. Maybe they've come from a hospital, have a loved one who is ill. Maybe somebody in the family just died. There could be any number of reasons why that person is driving. So I don't have to impute bad motives to the person for doing something that I find offensive in traffic. And of course, does everybody do that? I think the reality is that people get so offended, so incensed by other drivers' faults and what they consider discourtesy that they react not just with verbal abuse, sometimes with gestures, obscene gestures, but some even go to the extent of using violence, and we call that road rage. Some people will actually kill others because thankfully they are very, very few. But the anger part, and I think those of us, if we've driven considerable amounts over the years, we've probably encountered that at least once or twice in our lives. I'll just mention on a somewhat lighter note a story that I've told before of a of a lady I once visited who was interested in attending church. And she told us how her life was changing as a result of studying the Bible and how she was transforming her behavior for the better. And she said, even in traffic, even when I drive, I'm becoming different. I'm not the way I used to be, swearing at people when they cut me off. And she said, I don't use that language anymore. If a driver is doing something he or she should not, I'm going to use biblical language to describe him. So I'll call them, you uncircumcised Philistine. And that's how she expressed her displeasure. So I think we told her, well, that's progress. That's progress. You're on the right track there. But I think all of us are probably guilty of offensive language or behavior at one time or another. But as I said, we tend to cut ourselves a lot of slack, but not so much with others. And a classic example of this is in 2 Samuel 12. 2 Samuel 12. And this is the story of Nathan talking to David. It's a familiar account, but let's go ahead and read it. 2 Samuel 12, verse 1, the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to David, and when he entered the king's presence, he tells him a little parable, a little story. In a certain town there lived two men, one rich, the other poor. The rich man had large flocks and herds. The poor man had nothing of his own except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He reared it, and it grew up in his home together with its children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, nestled in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. And one day a traveler came to the rich man's house, and he, too mean to take something from his own flock or herd to serve to his guest, took the poor man's lamb and served that up. So immediately, Nathan recounts a story of a man who did something extremely offensive, extremely inconsiderate, extremely rude. And so David can see that immediately and reacts and says, verse 5, and we read that David was very angry and burst out, as the Lord lives, the man who did this deserves to die, and he shall pay for the lamb 4 times over because he's done this and shown no pity. And so this is very clear to David, and Nathan replies to David, you are the man. David had not seen himself as that man. He couldn't see himself as causing offense. He was blinded to the offensive nature of his behavior completely. Now, if David, a man after God's own heart, couldn't see his behavior until God sent Nathan to tell him directly to his face, is it possible that we too could sometimes be blinded to our own behavior? I mean, we saw that, I think, in Luke 6, talking about the splinter and the beam. 30 years ago, on August 15, 1989, an MBA from Harvard published a book that would become an international bestseller. He titled it 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the author was Stephen Covey. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have read the book. And one of the principles that Covey described in his book, and he labeled it habit number 5, I think it's directly relevant to our topic today. Habit 5 is seek first to understand and then to be understood. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. Now, I think most of us, had we been writing this book, might have chosen to write seek first to be understood and then to understand. But Covey put this in that way for a reason, because typically we want to be understood, and then we might choose to take the time to understand the other person. But of course, we put ourselves first. And Covey was saying, no, I think you need to put your neighbor first. It's a biblical principle. You love your neighbor. Now, I've been married for a while, but of course, not as long as many of you here in this room. But certainly in the decades now, I guess, I've been married, I hope I've learned a thing or two about living in relative harmony in such close proximity with another person. who isn't here, so I can, I guess, say this freely, because I know none of you are going to report me, I hope. Okay. But, and many of you, of course, know this better than I do, but you're living with a person who doesn't necessarily think or act or speak exactly as you would, or as maybe you would want them to do. And so, certainly looking back, I remember sometimes being offended or upset at things my wife would say or do. And no doubt it was reciprocal. But since I've spoken before about this topic of not being easily offended, I made the effort to analyze at one time why exactly I was offended or upset at what she said or did. And so, applying Covey's principle, I sought to understand why my wife was motivated to say or do what she did. And they could be very minor things. But the question I'd ask myself was, is she deliberately trying to make me mad? Is that her motivation? Is that where she's coming from? And you know what I discovered? As I sought to understand, I discovered that most of the time, perhaps 99% of the time, she was coming from a good place. She was trying to be helpful. She was trying to be kind. She was not trying to be offensive. She was not trying to make me upset. And that made all the difference. It helped me to change my response, to realize she's coming from a good place. Now, maybe I would do it differently. I would say it differently, but she is not trying to offend me. So I realized I had no reason to be offended or upset. And I also realized that I could and I should respond with politeness and kindness, courtesy, and even appreciation. And of course, I think we can use this approach not just with our spouses and other family members, but with others in general. You ask yourself, are most people you encounter in life seeking to offend you? And is that what they got up thinking that morning? I want to offend this person. Was that the impulse that motivates them? Or could it be that they're just trying to do their best in life, trying to get on with their lives, and everybody has a lot on their plate, and that being fallible, just like you, just like me, sometimes they make mistakes and say things and do things that perhaps they shouldn't? Maybe they're convicted about things just like you are, but their convictions are just different than yours. Let's go to James chapter 1. James chapter 1. Another very valuable verse. James chapter 1, verse 19. I'll break into the second half of the verse. Everyone, writes James, everyone should be quick to listen. Quick to listen. And listening, of course, implies making an effort to understand. Not just react, but listen, understand. Not just hear the words, but listen, really listen. Everyone should be quick. But it's gone. I need to do my Whitfield trick, I guess. Is it working now? Okay, good. All right, so everyone should be quick to listen, and we had to listen to that. Slow to speak, and slow to be angry. Sometimes we use the principle of counting to 10, but to give us time to reflect, to think, to analyze. Before I react, let me ask myself, where is this person coming from? As I said, with a traffic situation, what could perhaps be causing this person to drive in the way he or she is driving? Or if it's a friend or a spouse or a family member, what could be motivating this person? Are they actually seeking to do something good, something positive, something helpful, instead of what my first reaction would be if I was quick to speak and quick to be angry? I would assume the worst. That's what tends to be our initial response. We assume the worst. We assume the negative. And certainly, as I said, the world we live in, I mean, just watch any cable channel or listen to talk radio. You find people you're just quick to be offended and quick to offend as well. So think about what makes you angry on a typical day. Is it righteous indignation? Is it being angry at sin, which is against God? Or are we mostly angry because of relatively trivial things, because our feelings have been hurt or we disagree with somebody's opinion? In my experience, most people's anger is about personal issues, not because of sin per se. I mean, it could be that someone didn't invite me to their party, so I'm offended. But did that person sin by not inviting me? Probably not, but I'm offended anyway. I'll just assume they meant to slight me. It couldn't possibly be an innocent or innocuous reason. So the advice here would be, don't assume the worst about others. After all, you wouldn't want them to assume the worst about you. Because when we assume the worst, we tend to nurse the hurt, the offense, and we're prompted to repay in kind. And that's when we start to call other people names and we seek to hurt them in some way, even if it's only verbally. And we're warned against that kind of response. Let's go to Luke, book of Luke, and we'll end up there with a couple of scriptures. First in Luke 18. Luke 18, verses 9 through 14. There's a parable that Jesus told aimed at those who were sure of their own goodness and looked down on everyone else, were offended by everyone else because they considered them inferior. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed this prayer: I thank you, God, that I'm not like the rest of mankind, greedy, dishonest, adulterous. They have the worst possible motivations, the worst possible behavior. I, on the other hand, fast twice a week, pay tithes on all I get. I'm a pretty good guy. The other kept his distance, wouldn't even raise his eyes to heaven, but beat upon his breast, saying, God, have mercy on me, sinner that I am. It was this man, I tell you, not the other, who went home acquitted of his sins. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. Whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And we find that even when Jesus was on the cross, Luke 23, and this account talks about two malefactors who were crucified with him. Even in that situation, there's someone seeking to take offense at Jesus. We saw at the beginning when we looked at Luke 6 how the scribes and the Pharisees were seeking to be offended by him. Well, here, as he is dying, someone is still seeking to be offended by Jesus. Luke 23, let's go to verse 39. 23:39. One of the criminals hanging there taunted him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. I mean, we heard you say, you work these miracles, you're bringing people back to life. We heard about Lazarus. Come on, do something. Your message has no credibility if you're not able to do that. But the other rebuked him and said, have you no fear of God? You're under the same sentence as he is. In our case, it's plain justice. We're paying the price for our misdeeds, but this man has done nothing wrong. But even there, one of the criminals took offense at Jesus. So we have to remember what Jesus expected of us, and he expects us to learn not to take offense, to forgive even our enemies, to love those that hate us and use us spitefully. In a few weeks, we'll be celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, a time that for us pictures an era of peace, the peace that Jesus will bring to the whole world. And we will undoubtedly have the opportunity in the future, especially at the beginning of the millennium, to teach others the way of peace, to teach them to forgive each other, teach them how not to take offense or be offended by other people, other groups, other nations. So brothers and sisters, brethren, let's get a good head start by not being so quick to take offense now.